Hello. We're just going to go over all the anatomy of the human skull and just kind of go over all of the parts. Those of you that are taking an anatomy class, hopefully this will be a good way to just kind of study, get a good overview for all the major parts, and I'm also going to go into some of the smaller parts as well. This is definitely one of the more complicated areas of anatomy, so there's a lot to go over. But I'll try and keep it as relatively short as I feel I can, while also giving the greatest amount of information. Okay. So, starting with the major portions, okay, you see these lines here. As you probably already know, these are called the sutures, just the joint where the bones meet together. Okay. So, you have your frontal. Well, excuse me, now that I mentioned sutures, let's do the sutures really quick, okay? You have four main sutures, okay? So this suture here that's kind of going across this way, and it goes clear to the other side, that's called the coronal suture. Now, a cut down that where you have the anterior and then the posterior sides is the coronal plane, so that makes sense for that to be the coronal suture. And if we're thinking about planes, it's kind of the same principle on the backside. We have the sagittal suture, okay, that's going along the sagittal plane. We have this one back here. That is called the lambdoidal suture. And then if we're at our sides, we have this one here that is called the squamosal or squamous suture, okay? Now these are separating plates of the skull, okay? So we have the really large one here. This is the parietal bone or parietal plate. Okay, we also have one on the other side. So you have the left and right parietal bone. Then you have this back one here. This is called the occipital bone. And then if we're looking at our front, we have this whole area clear back here and around. This is all the frontal bone. The frontal bone actually goes clear inside the eye. See that suture right there, okay? So this part, all of this on the inside of the orbit is also part of the frontal bone. Comes clear around here, okay, up inside the orbit. So those are the main portions. Then let's kind of keep ourselves at the side here for a minute and go over a few things here, okay? So this area right here is the most sensitive portion of the skull, okay? You don't want to get hit there with a baseball. It's called the pterion, has a silent P in the front, so pterion, but it's pronounced terion, okay? Excuse me. So this is where the frontal bone, parietal bone, and the temporal bone are meeting. You're probably wondering what this is. This is a different bone. It's called the sphenoid bone. You can see the sphenoid bone a lot better on the inside, so we can take a look at that. But yeah, and then there's a point here where three bones meet. That's called the asterion. Okay, sensitive, but not as sensitive as the pterion. All right. Then, if we're looking this area right here, okay, this is called the zygomatic arch. Okay. So the zygomatic arch comes off of the temporal bone, okay? So we could say, I'm going to start over. Sorry, I was thinking about starting over because of my time. I might just have to make this into 2 videos. I'll just keep going. So the zygomatic arch is this segment coming over here. And when we think in terms of process, a process is something that's coming off of a bone. So this portion right here that's coming off of the temporal bone would be referred to as the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. Okay, and then we have the zygomatic arch, which connects, and then this part would be the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. Okay, so this whole region right here is the zygomatic bone. And again, this actually goes on the inside of the orbit as well, okay? So, zygomatic process of the temporal bone, temporal process of the zygomatic bone, they meet, connecting, making the zygomatic arch, okay? For looking, actually, let's keep this at the side for a sec. You might see some things down here. I'll show these a little bit better on the underside, but just so you can see from here, you got 3 areas on the temporal bone. You got the mastoid process. You can actually feel that on yourself if you try and palpate back behind your ears. This is called the external acoustic meatus or external auditory meatus. This is the ear canal. And then this tooth-like projection coming off is the styloid process, okay? Come around to the front here, okay? Again, we have the frontal bone making up this big area here, okay? We have the orbits. Now, the orbits have several different parts that make it up, okay? So I think I've already said we have the zygomatic bone on the inside here, the frontal bone at the top. We also have this portion here, which is part of the maxillary bone. Now, the maxillary bone is all of this area, okay? It comes clear around and then way up here, okay? But it also goes on the inside of the orbit. Then if we're looking here, this is part of the sphenoid bone. Remember that bone I was talking about over here? This is just a different side of it, sphenoid, okay? Right here. Then this part right here is part of the ethmoid bone, okay? In a live skull, this actually disintegrates pretty quickly, and they're able to get somewhat of a time frame on when the individual died, if that's gone, okay? And this right here is called the lacrimal bone. You have the lacrimal fossa right here, which actually houses the lacrimal gland, which is where the tears, so tears come from the lacrimal gland up here. Excuse me, I meant lacrimal duct here. But the lacrimal gland is up here. And tears will go across the eye, through the lacrimal duct, and then out the nose, which is why you'll notice when you cry, sometimes you get a runny nose. It's actually tears that is coming out, and not so much mucus like you would think. Okay, so back here, there's a couple structures. Let's see if we can get a good view. So you got the hole right there. That's the optic canal. You'll get a better view of that on the inside. Then here we kind of have this hole here. That's the superior orbital fissure. And then here is the infraorbital fissure. Okay, so 3 holes there. I also have some holes here. Okay, this is the supraorbital foramen. In a lot of people, it's actually a notch. It's just like a little divot here, not a hole. So it could also be a supraorbital notch. And then down here you have the infraorbital notches, okay? So all of these holes and things that we're going over, and there's a lot of them, different things are going through them, arteries, veins, and nerves, okay, different vessels. So this guy doesn't have a mandible, this is from a different guy, but same principle. We got 2 holes here, that's the mental foramen. On the back side of the mandible, we have these are called the mandibular foramen, okay? Then you also have these processes here, the condylar process and the coronoid process, okay? So now I know that these are coming from different skulls, but so the condylar process sticks up inside here. That's where you have your temporomandibular joint, okay? And there's different portions, different areas of the mandible as well. So we have the ramus of the mandible, the angle of the mandible, and the body of the mandible, okay? And as I have it here, I'm gonna go over the teeth as well, even though he doesn't have all of his, okay? You got your central incisors. The lateral incisors are just next to the central. Then you have your canines. As you can see, he's missing a lot of his teeth. Then you have first and second premolar, and then first, second, and third molar. Now, this guy's obviously had his wisdom teeth removed, so he doesn't have those ones. But your third molars is your wisdom teeth. Okay, so let's go back here. I am going to, actually, really quick, I did miss parts of the nasal area here. Let's get this. Okay, so this section here is part of the maxilla, like I was talking about, clear out all of this. But just next to it is the nasal bone, okay? If you get punched really hard, that's the bone that breaks. Okay, then coming down into the nasal area, this part is called the nasal septum, this big line coming up, and it's actually 2 bones that are together. The top portion of it is called the palatine plate of the ethmoid bone, okay? And we'll see more of the ethmoid bone on the inside. And then the bottom part is called the vomer, okay? Again, we'll get a better look on the inside of the skull. Then you have these weird projections that are kind of folds coming on the inside. These are called the nasal concha. This is the middle and the inferior, okay? There is a superior that's part of the ethmoid bone, which you can't really see unless you've taken out the ethmoid. So we probably won't really get to see the superior nasal concha. Let's see, am I missing anything here? I don't think so. Okay, I'm gonna take this off. Okay, before I actually look inside, I'm gonna get the underside. Okay. You can feel this part on the back of your skull. You can actually palpate it. It's called the external occipital protuberance. Okay. And then coming off, you have these slight protuberances that are out in an entire line. This is called the superior nuchal line. Okay. You also have one down here called the inferior nuchal line. Then, if we come up really quick while we're here, just so we can get a better view, this is your mastoid process that you can palpate, your styloid process, that's tooth-like projection, your external acoustic meatus. Okay. Now, you'll see these things, just so you know, they're not actually a part of the skull. This is where the the condylar process of the mandible, that actually is housed inside here. You probably heard of TMJ, lockjaw. That's the process of that. What happens is that process isn't locked inside this area. And so you have to push it in. And when it enters it, it causes that popping sound. Okay. This big hole in the center is the foramen magnum. Obviously, now that's what your spinal cord goes through. Okay. Now, off to the side, you have these holes. You got one here and here. These are your hypoglossal canals. And right here is your condylar canals. You have a little divot here. These are called your condylar fossa. And then you have these big projections that stick out here, and these are called your occipital condyles. These are the parts that run along the C1 vertebrae, and so you're able to kind of rock back and forth. Let's turn it a little bit this way. These really large ones here, this is your jugular foramen. Obviously, your jugular vein is going to be going through that. These small holes here is your stylomastoid foramen, okay, between the between the stylus and the mastoid process, okay? So basically just put those two names together. Then, if we're right here, this is where the carotid entry point is, the carotid canal. This is the foramen lacerum. This is the foramen ovale. Okay, it's got kind of an oval shape. And then just below it, the small one is your foramen spinosum. Okay. So yeah, that's a lot of holes there. It takes a while to learn. You just got to memorize it. Okay, foramen ovale, foramen spinosum, foramen lacerum. Okay, carotid canal, jugular foramen. Okay. Okay. If we come up this way a little bit, we have this section right here. Okay, this is the vomer, that part I was telling you about that's on the bottom side, on the inside of the nose. Okay, and the top part is the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid, okay, which connects here. We'll see that better. Oh, excuse me, I got that backwards. The vomer is right here, okay, and the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid is the bottom part coming off. Okay, we'll see that better on the inside. Let's see. Okay, so this wings right here, okay, is part of what we would call the pterygoid processes, and they come off of the sphenoid bone. The sphenoid bone is always kind of hard to imagine because it's got a really weird shape. It kind of comes around here, clear up here on the temple where I was showing you, okay? But yeah, you got your medial plate and you have your lateral plate. You got it on both sides. Okay, here you have your palatine process, okay? Then you have your horizontal plate of the palatine. You also have a vertical, but it doesn't really show on these models. They're in here and they kind of run up and down. Vertical plate of the palatine. Let's see, you have your greater palatine foramina, which actually doesn't show on this model, but there's 2 holes here. Then you have your lesser palatine foramina, which is like 3 holes here and here. They do not show on this model though. Let's see. See if I'm missing anything. Let me think for a sec. Okay, I think if I remember anything, I'll just come back to it. All right, we're gonna look on the inside here. Okay. So you'll kind of see how we have 3 different segments. Okay, you have your anterior fossa, your medial fossa, and your posterior or occipital fossa. Again, you got your foramen magnum here. Your hypoglossal canals are off to the side. Your jugular canals are right here. Jugulars are always the really big ones. Then you have these holes that are coming out right here. These are your internal auditory or acoustic meatus. Remember, we have an external and we also have an internal. And that is part of this segment here, which is called the petrous part of the temporal bone. This area is what houses all of the internal organs of the ear. It's a very dense, hard part of the bone. Okay. Then if you up here, remember you got your foramen lacerum, you got your foramen spinosum, your foramen ovale, and then one part that's a little bit different on the inside than the outside, you got a foramen rotundum. Foramen rotundum, okay? You also have your optic canals, okay? This is where the optic nerve comes in. If you'll remember how I was telling you, it's in the orbit, comes out the orbit there, connects to the eyes. Okay, and then remember how you have the superior orbital fissure. That part is, you can't, it's hard to see it on the model with the camera here, but it's right underneath here. Okay. We also have this entire area that, okay, see where the orange lines mark? Okay. All of this is the sphenoid bone. Kind of looks like a bat. It's also called the bat bone. Okay. Now you have the lesser wing of the sphenoid, which is this area up here. And then you have the greater wing of the sphenoid. And then in the center here, you have what's called the sella turcica, or Turkish saddle. If you kind of turn it from the side here, you can kind of see it's got like a saddle appearance. Okay, like this is the back where you'd sit against and your legs would go across, Turkish saddle. So it's called the sella turcica. Now in the center is called the hypophyseal fossa. And that's actually what holds the pituitary gland, the master gland. Okay, I'm coming off the brain there. Okay, let me think for a minute. Up here, okay. So this part is actually the top portion of the ethmoid bone. Okay, and it is called the, I lost it, cribriform plate, excuse me. Okay, the cribriform plate. You have all of these little tiny holes in the cribriform plate, which is actually where your smell is coming through to hit the nerves to interpret that smell. Okay. In the center here, you have the crista galli. Okay, that connects to a part of the dura mater. That's part of the brain. Okay. Let's see. I think that's it. I think I'm going to end that here because I'm just about to run out in another 10 seconds here. I hope I got everything, at least all of the main parts. So, thanks for listening.